Ethan Brooks drove slowly through the pristine streets of Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood known for its wealth and elegance. The morning sun reflected off the perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars parked in circular driveways, adding a golden hue to the already picturesque scene. Despite the outward calm, Ethan's mind was anything but peaceful. The upcoming trial loomed over him like a dark cloud, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing day. The accusations of racial profiling and excessive force echoed in his head, gnawing at his confidence. He had spent years serving this community, upholding the law as he believed it should be upheld. So why did it feel like the world was turning against him now? "They don't understand," Ethan muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'm just doing my job, keeping everyone safe." But even as he said the words, a seed of doubt began to take root in his mind. Was he really just doing his job, or had he crossed a line somewhere along the way? The question lingered, making him uncomfortable in his own skin. As he continued his patrol, Ethan's thoughts kept returning to the trial. What would he say in court? How could he convince the judge and jury that his actions were justified, that he had only been trying to maintain order? The more he thought about it, the more agitated he became. His leg bounced nervously, and he found himself grinding his teeth, a habit he had developed over the past few weeks as the stress of the situation mounted. The pressure felt like a weight on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Ethan loosened his collar, trying to shake off the feeling of being trapped, but the sense of unease persisted. He had always prided himself on being a man of discipline, someone who followed the rules and did what was necessary to keep the peace. Yet now, everything he had worked for seemed to be at risk. His father and grandfather had both worn the same police uniform with pride, passing down their values of discipline and respect for authority. Ethan had always wanted to live up to their legacy, to make them proud. But now, as he clipped on his badge each morning, he felt a pang of uncertainty. Was he truly honoring their memory, or had he lost sight of what was right in his determination to maintain control? Ethan's patrol car eased through the quiet streets, his eyes scanning left and right, searching for anything out of place. The neighborhood was peaceful, but to Ethan, it felt like the calm before a storm. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was about to go wrong, that his life was about to change in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. As he rounded a corner onto Maple Avenue, Ethan's eyes locked onto a figure standing outside one of the grandest mansions on the street. The man was black, in his late 40s, dressed casually but with an air of confidence that caught Ethan's attention. Something about the man seemed out of place in this neighborhood, and Ethan's instincts kicked in. He pulled the patrol car to a stop and got out, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. As he approached the man, Ethan's heart raced, a mix of adrenaline and anxiety flooding his system. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked, his voice stern, masking the uncertainty he felt inside. The man looked at Ethan calmly, seemingly unfazed by the officer's presence. "No, I'm just waiting for someone," he replied. Ethan studied the man's face, searching for any sign of dishonesty. The man's gaze was steady, his expression unreadable, but Ethan's mind was already racing, connecting dots that weren't there. In this wealthy neighborhood, a black man standing outside a mansion seemed suspicious, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Ethan pressed, his tone hardening. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained composed. "Yes, I'm sure," he said. Ethan's doubts intensified. He didn't want to admit it, but he was already making assumptions, driven by the fear and anxiety that had been building inside him for weeks. His hand tightened on his gun, the weight of his badge and the legacy it represented heavy on his shoulders. In that moment, Ethan was blinded by his own fears and prejudices, unable to see the truth standing right in front of him. He didn't realize that the man he was about to arrest was Samuel Johnson, the judge presiding over his trial, the man who would soon determine his fate. But for now, all Ethan saw was another suspect, another potential threat to the order he was so desperate to maintain. And as he prepared to make the arrest, he couldn't help but wonder, would justice be served, or was there a lesson he had yet to learn? Ethan's heart started to beat really fast. Without thinking, he made quick assumptions about the man he saw. What's he doing here? Ethan thought, his mind jumping to conclusions. He doesn't look like he belongs. Without a second thought, Ethan turned on the lights of his patrol car and pulled over to the curb. His hands got sweaty as he gripped the steering wheel. He took a deep breath to calm down, but it didn't help. Ethan quickly opened the car door and stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. He walked towards the man with fast, angry steps, his face in a serious frown. "Hey, you!" Ethan called out, his voice loud and strict. "What are you doing here?" The man turned around, surprise showing on his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan cut him off before he could say anything. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Ethan demanded, leaving no room for argument. He stood with his feet apart, trying to look tough. The man's face changed from surprise to a mix of confusion and worry. He slowly reached into his pocket, keeping eye contact with Ethan. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest, and his mind was filled with bad thoughts. He didn't stop to think that the man might have a good reason to be there. All Ethan saw was a possible threat, and his deep-down feelings made him suspicious. As the man pulled out his wallet, Ethan's fingers twitched near his holster. The tension in the air was thick, like you could cut it with a knife. Ethan's aggressive approach had turned what should have been a simple interaction into something that could get out of hand. The man, whose name was Samuel Carter, calmly pulled out his ID and handed it to Ethan with a steady hand. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just waiting for my driver to pick me up," Samuel said. Ethan snatched the ID, narrowing his eyes as he looked at it. Even though the ID was clear, Ethan's biases made him doubt it. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Yeah, right," Ethan scoffed, his voice full of doubt. "What's a man like you doing in this neighborhood?" Samuel took a deep breath and kept calm. "I live here, officer. That's my home right behind me," he said, pointing to the big house Ethan had seen him in front of. Ethan's face twisted in disbelief. He looked at the house, then back at Samuel, unable to believe it. "You expect me to believe that?" he asked, his voice getting louder. "I think you're just hanging around causing trouble in this nice neighborhood." As Ethan's accusations got louder, people on the street started to notice. A jogger slowed down, watching with concern. A couple walking their dog stopped, the man reaching for his phone. "Sir, I assure you I'm not causing any trouble," Samuel said calmly but firmly. "I'm just waiting for my ride. There's no need for this to get worse." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted, stepping closer to Samuel. "I know your type, always up to no good, thinking you can fool the law." By now, a small crowd had gathered, and some people had their phones out, recording what was happening. Whispers of worry and shock spread among the onlookers. Samuel stood his ground, looking straight at Ethan. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I think you're judging me based on how I look. I'd be happy to show you more proof that I live here if that helps," Samuel said. Ethan's hand tightened on his holster, his body tense with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat. "Well, I'm not falling for your act." Ethan's face was twisted with anger as he reached for his handcuffs. "That's it. You're under arrest for loitering and obstructing justice," he growled, ignoring Samuel's calm words. Samuel's eyes widened in disbelief, but he stayed calm. "Officer, please, this is unnecessary." "I've done nothing wrong," Samuel said softly. Ethan roughly grabbed Samuel's arm and spun him around to cuff his hands behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked as they tightened around Samuel's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Ethan recited, his voice full of disdain. The people watching gasped and murmured in shock, and some shouted in protest, but Ethan didn't pay attention. He was focused on what he thought was his duty. "Please, sir," Samuel said softly as Ethan led him to the patrol car. "This is a mistake. I'm a respected member of this community." Ethan scoffed, pushing Samuel into the back seat. "Save it for the judge," he sneered, slamming the door shut. As Ethan got into the driver's seat, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. He felt a small twinge of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. "No," he thought. "I'm doing my job. I'm protecting this neighborhood." The drive to the station was tense. Samuel sat silently in the back, his face calm but resigned. Ethan's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing with justifications for his actions. "You people always think you can outsmart the law," Ethan muttered, glancing at Samuel in the mirror. "Well, not on my watch." Samuel met Ethan's eyes in the mirror, his gaze steady and unafraid. "Officer," he said calmly, "I hope you'll realize soon that you've made a big mistake." Ethan's stomach churned at Samuel's words, but he pushed the feeling down. He told himself he was preventing a crime. He was doing the right thing. Wasn't he? Ethan marched Samuel into the police station, his grip firm on Samuel's arm. The bright lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces. Other officers and staff looked up from their desks, raising their eyebrows at the sight of a well-dressed man in handcuffs. "Sit," Ethan ordered, pointing to a hard plastic chair near his desk. Samuel sat down without saying a word, his eyes calmly scanning the room. Ethan rummaged through his desk drawer and pulled out a form, slapping it down in front of Samuel along with a pen. "Fill this out," he demanded. "We need your contact details in case there's a reported case in the neighborhood." Samuel took a deep breath, his frustration showing in the slight tremor of his hand as he reached for the pen. "Officer Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite the situation, "I assure you, this is unnecessary. I have an important appointment that I'm now late for." Ethan crossed his arms, unmoved by Samuel's words. "You should have thought of that before you decided to hang around in a wealthy neighborhood," he retorted. Samuel shook his head slightly but began filling out the form. His pen moved quickly across the paper, his handwriting neat even though he was in a hurry. Ethan watched him closely, still convinced he had stopped a potential crime. As Samuel neared the end of the form, he glanced at his watch, his brow furrowing with worry. "Please, officer," he said, looking up at Ethan, "I really must go. I have a crucial meeting that I can't miss." Ethan scoffed and continued to glare at him. Ethan's heart started beating faster. Without thinking, his mind jumped to conclusions. What is he doing here? Ethan wondered, his biases taking over, as he doesn't look like he belongs. Without hesitating, Ethan turned on his patrol car's lights and stopped at the curb. His palms got sweaty as he gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline rushing through him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but his body only felt more tense. Ethan opened the car door and stepped out, his hand automatically resting on his gun. He walked quickly toward the man, his face serious and stern. "Hey, you!" Ethan called out, his voice sharp and commanding. "What are you doing here?" The man turned, surprised, and opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan interrupted him before he could say a word. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Ethan demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stood with his feet apart, trying to look intimidating. The man looked confused and worried as he slowly reached into his pocket, keeping eye contact with Ethan. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his mind filled with assumptions. He didn't stop to think that this man might have a good reason for being here. All Ethan saw was a possible threat, his biases making him suspicious. As the man pulled out his wallet, Ethan's fingers twitched near his gun. The tension in the air was so thick you could feel it. Ethan's aggressive approach had turned what should have been a simple situation into something dangerous. Samuel Carter calmly took out his ID and handed it to Ethan with a steady hand. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just waiting for my driver to pick me up." Ethan grabbed the ID, narrowing his eyes as he examined it. Even though the ID was clear, his prejudices made him doubt it. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "A likely story," Ethan said, his voice full of doubt. "What's a man like you doing in this neighborhood?" Samuel took a deep breath, staying calm. "I live here, officer." "That's my home right behind me," he said, pointing to the large mansion behind him. Ethan's face twisted in disbelief. He looked at the house, then back at Samuel, unable to believe it. "You expect me to believe that?" he asked, his voice getting louder. "I think you're just hanging around, causing trouble in this nice neighborhood." As Ethan's accusations grew louder, people on the street began to notice. A jogger slowed down, watching with concern, and a couple walking their dogs stopped, the man reaching for his phone. "Sir, I assure you I'm not causing any trouble," Samuel said calmly but firmly. "I'm just waiting for my ride. There's no need for this to get worse." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted, stepping closer to Samuel. "I know your type, always causing trouble, thinking you can outsmart the law." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some people had their phones out, recording what was happening. The onlookers whispered in concern and outrage. Samuel stood his ground, keeping eye contact with Ethan. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I think you're making assumptions based on how I look. I'd be happy to show you more proof that I live here if it helps." Ethan's hand tightened on his gun, his body tense with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he said angrily. "Well, I've got news for you. I'm not falling for your act." Ethan's face twisted with rage as he reached for his handcuffs. "That's it. You're under arrest for loitering and obstructing justice," he growled, ignoring Samuel's calm words. Samuel's eyes widened in disbelief, but he stayed composed. "Officer, please, this is unnecessary. I've done nothing wrong." Ethan roughly grabbed Samuel's arm and spun him around, cuffing his hands behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked as they tightened around Samuel's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Ethan recited coldly, his voice filled with disdain. The onlookers gasped in shock. Some shouted in protest, but Ethan ignored them. He was focused on what he believed was his duty. "Please, sir," Samuel said softly as Ethan led him to the patrol car. "This is a mistake. I'm a respected member of this community." Ethan scoffed, shoving Samuel into the back seat. "Save it for the judge," he sneered, slamming the door shut. As Ethan got into the driver's seat, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. He felt a small pang of doubt, but quickly pushed it away. "No," he thought. "I'm doing my job. I'm protecting this neighborhood." The drive to the station was tense. Samuel sat silently in the back, his face calm but resigned. Ethan's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing with justifications for his actions. "You people always think you can outsmart the law," Ethan muttered, glancing at Samuel in the mirror. "Well, not on my watch." Samuel met Ethan's eyes in the reflection, his gaze steady and unafraid. "Officer," he said calmly, "I hope you'll realize soon that you've made a big mistake." Ethan's stomach churned at Samuel's words, but he pushed down the feeling. He was stopping a crime, he told himself. He was doing the right thing, wasn't he? Ethan marched Samuel into the police station, holding tightly to the man's arm. The bright lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on their faces. Other officers and staff looked up from their desks, eyebrows raised at the sight of the well-dressed man in handcuffs. "Sit," Ethan ordered, pointing to a hard plastic chair near his desk. Samuel sat down without a word, calmly looking around the room. Ethan dug through his desk drawer, pulling out a form and slapping it down in front of Samuel, along with a pen. "Fill this out," he demanded. "We need your contact details in case there's a reported case in the neighborhood." Samuel took a deep breath, his frustration showing in the slight tremor of his hand as he reached for the pen. "Officer Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite the situation, "I assure you this is unnecessary. I have an important appointment that I'm now late for." Ethan crossed his arms, unmoved by Samuel's words. "Should have thought of that before you decided to hang around in a wealthy neighborhood," he retorted. Samuel shook his head slightly, but started filling out the form. His pen moved swiftly across the paper, his handwriting neat even though he was in a hurry. Ethan watched him closely, still convinced he had stopped a crime. As Samuel finished the form, he glanced at his watch, his brow furrowing with worry. "Please, officer," he said, looking up at Ethan. "I really must go. I have a crucial meeting that I can't miss." Ethan took the form from Samuel, not really believing it was important. He read through it quickly, but his eyes widened a bit when he saw Samuel's job. He quickly covered up his surprise with a frown. Samuel stood up, fixing his shirt filthier, and asked politely if he could leave. Ethan hesitated, feeling a bit unsure, but he pushed the feeling away. "Fine," he said gruffly, pointing to the exit. "But don't let me see you in any suspicious areas again." Samuel nodded and left, feeling very frustrated, but he kept it inside. As he walked away, Ethan felt a small doubt growing in his mind. Ethan sat down at the police station, the creak of his chair a familiar sound in the busy room. He started filling out the paperwork for Samuel's arrest, feeling like it was just another day on the job. "One more troublemaker off the streets," he muttered proudly. He leaned back, stretching, feeling good about his work, but then he saw the calendar on his desk, with the date of his court hearing circled in red. His stomach tightened, and for a moment he felt less confident. What if they don't understand, he thought, worried. I'm just doing my job, keeping people safe. But the doubt kept growing, like a shadow at sunset. Ethan thought about the accusations of racism, the angry faces of people he'd arrested, and the whispers of his colleagues. For a moment he wondered if he might be wrong. What if his actions weren't as right as he thought? But he quickly pushed the doubt away. He straightened up, determined. No, he told himself firmly. I know what I'm doing. I'm protecting people. The court will see that. With new resolve, Ethan went back to his paperwork, pushing away the uncertainty. He was sure he was a good cop, and the trial would prove it. Ethan pulled into his driveway as the sun was setting, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. He stepped out of his patrol car and took a deep breath before going inside. The smell of dinner filled the air, but the usual warmth of home was missing. His wife, Emily, was in the kitchen, looking worried. How was your day? She asked, her voice tight. Ethan shrugged off his jacket. Same old, just keeping the streets safe. Emily's frown deepened. Ethan, we need to talk about the trial. He sighed and grabbed a beer from the fridge. There's nothing to talk about. I did my job, and the court will see that. But Emily pressed on. What if they don't, Ethan? This could end your career, everything we've worked for. Ethan cut her off sharply. It won't come to that. I know what I'm doing. They ate dinner in tense silence, the sound of their forks the only noise. Emily kept looking at Ethan, worried, but he avoided her gaze. After dinner, Ethan went to the living room and sat in his armchair. The TV was on, but he wasn't really watching. His mind was on the trial. He replayed the day's events in his mind. The arrest, the paperwork, the usual routine. He believed he was right. He was protecting people, keeping order. But Emily's words echoed in his head, making him doubt. What if the court didn't agree? What if his actions weren't as right as he thought? Ethan shook his head, pushing the doubts away. No, he was right. He had to be. Years of experience couldn't be wrong. As the night went on, Ethan sat in his chair thinking about the upcoming trial. He was determined to defend himself, to prove that his actions were necessary. The world needed cops like him, he thought. Someone had to make the tough decisions. With grim determination, Ethan settled deeper into his chair. He was ready to face the trial, just like he faced everything else in his life. The morning of the trial came, bringing a heavy feeling in Ethan's stomach. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with shaky hands. His police uniform, which usually made him proud, felt tight today. "You've got this," he muttered to himself, trying to feel confident, but doubt lingered in his mind, unwanted and stubborn. As Ethan walked to the courthouse, memories of past arrests filled his thoughts. He believed that each one had been right and justified. Officer Ethan Brooks was in big trouble. He had always believed he was just doing his job, keeping the streets safe and protecting the community. But now, as he stood in the courtroom, everything felt different. The accusations against him were serious. People were saying he had been unfair to others because of their race while doing his job as a police officer. It wasn't just one person saying this. There were many people, and the court had to decide if what they were saying was true. Ethan remembered some of the things he had done while on duty. There was a young black man he had stopped because he looked suspicious walking through a mostly white neighborhood. Ethan had thought he was just doing his job, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. Then there was the time he had pulled over a Hispanic woman for a routine traffic stop. He remembered how harshly he had questioned her about her immigration status, even though it was just supposed to be about a minor traffic violation. At the time, Ethan thought he was protecting his community, but now, standing in court, he wasn't so sure anymore. As Ethan walked toward the courthouse that morning, he noticed a crowd gathering outside. Some people were holding signs with messages like, "End police brutality," and "Justice for all." The words on the signs were clear, and Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of what they meant. He knew that this was more than just another day on the job. This was about his career, his reputation, and what kind of person he was. Inside the courthouse, everything was buzzing with activity. Lawyers in sharp suits hurried around with their briefcases, all busy with their own cases. Ethan's steps felt heavy as he walked through the marble hallway, each step bringing him closer to the moment of truth. He tried to keep his face stern and serious, not wanting to show any weakness. His lawyer, who was walking beside him, whispered, "Remember, stick to the facts," and gave Ethan a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Ethan nodded, trying to focus on the arguments he had prepared. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. When Ethan entered the courtroom, he saw that the benches were filled with people, all looking at him with a mix of curiosity and judgment. The room was filled with tension, and Ethan could feel it in the air. He took his seat at the defense table, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished wood. The judge's voice boomed through the room, calling everyone to stand, and Ethan's legs felt weak beneath him as he rose. He kept his eyes on the judge's bench, trying to steady himself for what was to come. Then, the doors behind the judge's bench opened, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The judge walked in, and Ethan's eyes widened in shock. It was Judge Samuel Carter, the same man Ethan had wrongfully arrested just days before. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man he had treated so unfairly, the man he had accused without reason, was now the one who would decide his fate. Judge Turner didn't show any sign that he recognized Ethan. His face was calm and professional as he looked around the courtroom. But Ethan was a mess of emotions. His hands trembled slightly, and he felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. The speech he had rehearsed over and over in his mind now seemed pointless. All he could think about was how unfairly he had treated this man, and now that man was in charge of his future. When Judge Turner began speaking, his voice was steady and strong. Officer Ethan Brooks, you stand accused of multiple instances of racist behavior in the performance of your duties as a police officer, he said. Ethan felt like he was drowning. He tried to respond, but his mouth was dry and his throat felt tight. All the confidence he had before was gone, replaced by fear and regret. The courtroom was silent, and everyone was watching him. Ethan knew that this was a moment that could change his life forever. As Samuel kept talking about the charges, Ethan felt dizzy. How could this be happening? Just yesterday, he had arrested this man, and now this man was the judge in Ethan's trial. The courtroom seemed to spin as Ethan tried to focus on what the judge was saying. Samuel listed the charges: racial profiling, using too much force against minorities, and abusing power. Samuel looked at Ethan as he spoke, and Ethan's stomach turned. He realized that Samuel knew about the wrongful arrest from the day before. It wasn't just a coincidence. This judge had felt Ethan's prejudice himself. The seriousness of the situation hit Ethan hard. As Samuel spoke, Ethan's mind replayed the events of the past day. He remembered how pleased he had been when arresting Samuel, thinking he was doing his job right. Now those same actions were being revealed in the courtroom as acts of prejudice and injustice. Ethan's hands began to sweat as he listened to the charges. Each one felt like a heavy blow, breaking down the confidence he had built around himself. He looked around the courtroom and saw angry, disappointed faces, all waiting to see how he would respond. The truth of his actions started to sink in. Ethan had always told himself that his behavior was necessary to keep order, but hearing it described in court made it sound much worse. He felt a deep shame as he realized how his actions must have looked to others, especially to those he had wronged. Judge Samuel Carter took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the courtroom before landing on Ethan. "I'd like to talk about something that happened just yesterday," he began in a clear, steady voice. "This event is a perfect example of why these charges are being brought against Officer Mitchell." The courtroom went silent, everyone watching Samuel as he started to describe what had happened the day before. Ethan's heart raced as he listened, remembering his actions clearly. "Yesterday afternoon, I was standing outside my home, waiting for my driver," Samuel explained. "Officer Mitchell approached me without any reason, immediately thinking I was up to something suspicious." As Samuel detailed the encounter, Ethan's face burned with shame. He heard gasps and whispers in the courtroom as the judge described how Ethan had aggressively questioned him, refusing to believe his answers. "Despite my calm manner and honest answers, Officer Mitchell arrested me for loitering and obstructing justice," Samuel said, his voice more sad than angry. "He took me to the station, made me fill out unnecessary paperwork, and delayed me from important matters." Ethan looked around the courtroom, seeing disbelief and disappointment on the faces of the people there. A knot formed in his stomach as the reality of his actions became clear. "This incident," Samuel continued, "is not just a one-time thing. It shows a pattern of behavior that Officer Mitchell has shown throughout his career. His actions come from prejudice and have hurt many people in our community." As Samuel spoke, Ethan couldn't look away. The judge's calm recounting of events stripped away all of Ethan's excuses, leaving him to face the truth of his actions. For the first time, he began to see his behavior through the eyes of the people he had hurt. The weight of his actions pressed down on Ethan, making it hard to breathe. He had always believed he was just doing his job, keeping order, but now, hearing his actions described so clearly, he couldn't deny the prejudice that had guided him. As Samuel continued, Ethan's lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, I must object to this personal account. It's unfair to my client," he argued, his voice strained. Samuel turned his calm gaze to the lawyer. "Counselor, I understand your concern. However, this incident is directly related to the charges at hand. I will allow myself to continue." His tone was firm but fair, leaving no room for further argument. Ethan's lawyer sat down, looking defeated. Ethan felt a bead of sweat slide down his back as Samuel resumed his account. Officer Mitchell's actions yesterday weren't just a mistake, Samuel explained, his voice ringing through the quiet courtroom. They were a sign of deep biases that have affected his entire career. Samuel began to present evidence of Ethan's past behavior, showing complaints from community members, data proving a pattern of racial profiling, and testimonies from Ethan's fellow officers. Time and again, Officer Mitchell has shown a habit of judging people based on their race instead of their actions, Samuel said, his words cutting through Ethan's remaining defenses. As Samuel spoke, Ethan felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had always told himself that his behavior was necessary for keeping order, but now, hearing it laid out so clearly, he couldn't deny the truth anymore. What we see here, Samuel continued, his voice filled with both sadness and determination, is not just one bad decision. It's a bigger problem that has caused harm to many people in our community. The courtroom stayed silent, hanging on Samuel's every word. Ethan looked around, seeing shock and disappointment on the faces of the people there. He felt a deep sense of shame wash over him as he realized the full impact of his actions. Samuel's words painted a picture of a police officer who had forgotten his duty to protect and serve everyone in the community equally. As he carefully took apart Ethan's defense, exposing the flaws in his thinking and the racism in his actions, Ethan felt his excuses falling apart. The courtroom was silent as Samuel finished his statement. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, making everyone, especially Ethan, face the hard truth of racism in law enforcement. Ethan sat in the courtroom, his shoulders slumped and his face pale. For the first time in his career, he felt exposed and vulnerable. Samuel's words pressed down on him, breaking the armor of self-righteousness he had worn for so long. As Samuel paused, letting the seriousness of his words sink in, Ethan's mind raced. He began to question everything he thought he knew about himself and his work. The certainty that had driven his actions for years began to crumble. Ethan looked around the courtroom and saw everyone staring at him. Their faces showed disappointment, anger, and sadness. For the first time, Ethan realized how others saw him, and he didn't like it. The room felt heavy with tension, and Ethan could feel everyone judging him. He fidgeted in his seat, his uniform feeling tight and uncomfortable. As he thought about what he had done, shame washed over him. He remembered all the people he had treated unfairly, and their faces flashed through his mind, reminding him of his mistakes. Ethan's hands trembled as he placed them on the table. He realized that his actions weren't about doing his job, but about using power in the wrong way. The room was so quiet that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. He looked up at Samuel, the man he had arrested the day before, who was now judging him. Ethan felt even more ashamed as he realized the irony of the situation. Samuel spoke calmly, his voice clear. "Officer Mitchell," he began, "the badge you wear is not just a symbol of authority. It's a symbol of trust, responsibility, and justice. Justice isn't just about following rules, it's about understanding and seeing the humanity in everyone." Each word hit Ethan hard, making him question everything he believed in. He couldn't look away from Samuel's intense gaze. Samuel continued, "The power we have comes with great responsibility. We must constantly question our own biases and see beyond the stereotypes that cloud our judgment." The courtroom remained silent, everyone listening closely to Samuel's words. Ethan felt exposed, like Samuel was speaking directly to his soul. Samuel challenged Ethan to confront the stereotypes he had held for so long and to see the people he had sworn to protect as individuals with their own stories and struggles. Ethan's mind raced with memories of past encounters, realizing how he had impacted lives without a second thought. The weight of his actions felt heavy, making it hard to breathe. Samuel's voice softened as he said, This isn't just about you, Officer Mitchell. It's about the community you serve, the trust that's been broken, and the opportunity for change. It's never too late to open your eyes, learn, and grow. Ethan felt tears forming, but he tried to stay composed. Samuel continued, "Today you stand accused of racist behavior, but I see this as more than just a trial. It's an invitation to change, to become the officer you promised to be when you first put on that badge." Ethan's world had turned upside down. The man he had wrongfully arrested was now offering him a chance at redemption. Ethan felt overwhelmed, confused, and truly humbled. Samuel's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan sat frozen, his mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. He braced himself for the punishment he thought he deserved, but Samuel's next words caught him off guard. "Officer Mitchell," Samuel said firmly yet kindly, "I believe that true justice isn't just about punishment, it's about growth and understanding. I'm sentencing you to 1 year of public service." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, confusion clear on his face. "You will work with underprivileged youth in our community," Samuel continued. "This isn't a punishment, Officer Mitchell. It's an opportunity, a chance to see beyond your biases and understand the people you've sworn to protect and serve." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Ethan felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. Ethan had expected to face anger, punishment, and maybe even lose his job, but instead, he was given a surprising chance at redemption. Samuel, the judge he had wronged, explained to him, "You're going to work with young people from different backgrounds. You'll listen to their stories, understand their challenges, and hopefully see things from their perspective." Ethan's mind raced. The idea of working closely with the very people he had mistreated filled him with a mix of fear and shame. He realized this would force him to confront the impact of his biases directly. Samuel's words were firm but fair. "This task won't be easy, Officer Mitchell. It will challenge you in ways you can't yet imagine. But I believe it's necessary, not just for you, but for our community." As Ethan took in the reality of what lay ahead, he felt overwhelmed. He had spent years building walls around himself, justifying his actions. Now those walls were crumbling, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The enormity of the task ahead hit him hard. He would have to face the consequences of his actions and look into the eyes of those he had wronged. The thought was terrifying, yet deep inside, a small spark of hope began to flicker. After the trial, Ethan stepped through the front door of his home, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the day's events. His wife, Emily, rushed to greet him, her face full of worry. "Ethan, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her, confused and disbelieving. "You're not going to believe this, Emily," he said softly. They moved to the living room and sat on the couch. Ethan took a deep breath and began to recount the trial. He told her about Samuel Carter being the judge and how the wrongful arrest had unfolded in the courtroom. "Instead of throwing the book at me, Samuel sentenced me to a year of public service. I have to work with underprivileged kids in the community," Ethan explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Public service? That's unexpected." Ethan nodded, still processing it all. "It's not a punishment, but a chance to grow and understand, to see beyond my biases." Emily reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "That's going to be tough, Ethan. Are you ready for that?" Ethan shook his head, feeling lost. "I don't know, Emily. I really don't know. All these years, I thought I was doing the right thing. But now, for the first time, I feel regret." Faces of those he had wronged flashed through his mind. He remembered the fear in Samuel's eyes when he had arrested him and the confusion on other faces he had treated harshly. "I've made so many mistakes," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "How am I supposed to face these kids knowing what I've done?" Emily moved closer, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "It won't be easy, Ethan, but maybe this is a chance to make things right and to be better." Ethan leaned into her embrace, feeling both scared and oddly hopeful. The road ahead would be challenging, but perhaps it was time to confront his biases and learn to see the world through different eyes. The morning sun peeked through the curtains as Ethan reluctantly got out of bed. It was the day he had been dreading, his first day of community service at the local youth center. He moved slowly, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. As he approached the old, worn-down building with the faded sign reading Oakwood Youth Center, his stomach churned with anxiety. He took a deep breath, pushed open the heavy metal door, and stepped inside. The air was thick with tension. Ethan looked around the cramped reception area, taking in the mismatched furniture and peeling paint. A few teenagers lounged on tattered couches, eyeing him suspiciously. A stern voice called out, "Officer Mitchell!" Ethan turned to see a tall woman with graying hair approaching him. Laura Adams, the director, had a serious look on her face. "I'm Laura Adams, the director," she said without shaking hands. "I've been told about your situation." Ethan felt nervous under her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to start my community service." Laura nodded and said, "Follow me." As they walked down the hall, Ethan felt people looking at him. The walls were covered with colorful posters, different from the usual police station. Laura led Ethan to a small office and told him to sit. "Let me be clear, Officer Mitchell," she said in a serious voice. "These kids have had bad experiences with police before. I don't want you to do anything that makes them feel scared or unwelcome." Ethan, feeling unsure, said softly, "I understand." "Good," Laura said. "You'll help with our after-school tutoring program. Some kids need help with their schoolwork and they need patience. Can you do that?" Ethan hesitated, feeling nervous. How could he connect with these kids? What if they didn't like him? He felt far from his usual patrol car. "I'll do my best," he said finally. Laura's face softened a bit. "That's all we ask. Remember, this is a chance for you and the kids to grow." As Ethan followed Laura to a bright room with tables full of books and papers, all the kids looked up at him. "This is Officer Mitchell," Laura said. "He'll help with tutoring for the next few months." Ethan stood awkwardly, waving a hand. "Hello," he said, trying to sound friendly. The kids looked at him with a mix of fear and curiosity, and some whispered to each other. Ethan felt uncomfortable, used to people respecting his uniform instead of looking at him with doubt. Laura showed him an empty chair and said, "Start by helping Jamal with his math homework." Ethan walked over to a table where a boy named Jamal sat with a textbook. Jamal looked up with a worried look. "Hi, Jamal," Ethan said, trying to sound kind. "Can I see what you're working on?" Jamal hesitated but gave Ethan his paper. Ethan looked at the math problems and realized he didn't remember how to solve them. He felt nervous and started to sweat as he tried to remember his old-school lessons. Jamal looked confused, and Ethan saw he wasn't helping much. He noticed other volunteers talking easily with the kids, making them feel comfortable, while he felt like an outsider. Ethan listened to the kids talk about their struggles, problems at home, and dreams. One girl said, "My brother got stopped by the cops again yesterday. He wasn't doing anything wrong." Ethan felt a twinge of guilt, thinking about the times he had stopped people. He began to see the kids as real people with their own stories, not just as troublemakers. When the session ended, Ethan realized he hadn't helped much with homework, but he had learned something important. He saw the kids as real people with feelings, just like anyone else. As the weeks went by, Ethan started getting used to going to the youth center. At first, he didn't like it at all and dreaded each visit. But slowly, things began to change. The kids who used to seem all the same started to become special individuals with their own unique stories. One of the first kids Ethan got to know was Sophie. She was a bright-eyed girl with big dreams of becoming a doctor. Despite her family's financial struggles, Sophie never gave up on her dream. Ethan found himself looking forward to their conversations about science and medicine. He admired her determination and began to see her as more than just another face at the center. Then there was Riley, a quiet boy who loved to draw. At first, Ethan thought Riley might be trouble because he was so reserved, but as he spent more time at the center, he discovered Riley's hidden talent. Riley had a sketchbook full of beautiful artwork that he kept hidden away. Ethan was amazed by Riley's talent and realized that there was much more to him than he had initially thought. As Ethan got to know the kids better, he started to understand their lives in a new way. He learned that many of them had burdens he had never considered before. Some kids were taking care of their younger siblings while their parents worked multiple jobs. Others struggled to keep up in school while dealing with unstable home lives. Ethan began to see their challenges and struggles as more than just stories. They were real and personal. One afternoon, Ethan arrived at the center and found Jamal sitting alone in the corner, looking very sad. Ethan approached him cautiously, asking, "Everything okay, Jamal?" His voice was softer now, reflecting his growing empathy. Jamal looked up with red-rimmed eyes and told Ethan that his dad had been arrested the night before. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. In the past, he might have assumed Jamal's father was guilty without a second thought. But now, he found himself wondering about the circumstances and how this would affect Jamal and his family. He sat down next to Jamal and asked if he wanted to talk. As Jamal opened up, Ethan listened carefully. He realized that the world these kids lived in was far more complex than he had ever imagined. Their struggles, hopes, and fears were much deeper than what he had seen from behind his badge. Ethan's next challenge came in the form of Andre, a lanky teenager with a permanent scowl on his face. The center director told Ethan that Andre was their most troubled case, in and out of juvenile detention more times than they could count. The director's voice carried a hint of doubt as he said, "Good luck." Andre didn't trust easily, and Ethan knew he had to be patient. Ethan approached Andre, who was sitting alone with his arms crossed tightly. "Hey there, Andre. I'm Ethan," he said, trying to sound friendly. Andre barely glanced up and muttered, "Don't care." Ethan took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay patient. He asked if he could sit down, and Andre shrugged, which Ethan took as a reluctant yes. As Ethan sat down, he noticed the faded bruises on Andre's knuckles. In the past, he might have judged Andre harshly, but now he wondered what battles Andre had been fighting. For days, their interactions followed a pattern. Ethan would try to engage Andre in conversation, and Andre would respond with grunts or one-word answers. But Ethan didn't give up. He continued showing up day after day, sitting with Andre even when there was silence between them. Slowly, things began to change. Andre started answering with more than just one word. Ethan learned that Andre loved basketball but had never played on a real team. He was good at math but struggled with reading. He had a little sister he adored but rarely got to see. One afternoon, while they were shooting hoops in the center's small courtyard, Andre suddenly stopped and asked Ethan, "Why do you keep trying?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Everyone else just gives up on me." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He thought about all the times he had given up on kids like Andre, labeling them as lost causes. "Because I'm starting to see that everyone deserves a chance," Ethan said softly, "even when they think they don't." Andre's eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of hope in them. In that moment, Ethan realized how much his past actions had affected kids like Andre. He had judged people without knowing their stories and impacted lives without even realizing it. As they resumed their game, Ethan felt a shift in his perspective. He wasn't just serving his sentence anymore. He was learning, growing, and maybe, just maybe, making a difference. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's presence at the youth center became a familiar and welcome sight. At first, the changes in his demeanor were subtle, but the staff and the young people he worked with quickly noticed. One sunny afternoon, Ethan was helping Andre with his math homework. He was patiently explaining a tricky problem when Nina, a longtime volunteer at the center, approached them. Nina watched with a small smile as Ethan took his time to help Andre understand the concept. "You know, Ethan," Nina said warmly, breaking the silence, "when you first started here, I wasn't sure how this was going to work out. But I have to say, you've really proven me wrong." Ethan looked up, surprised by the compliment. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks, Nina," he said sincerely. "I guess I had a lot to learn." As days passed, Ethan found himself eagerly looking forward to his time at the center. The fulfillment he felt from helping these kids was unlike anything he had experienced in his policing career. He began to see the world through their eyes, gaining an understanding of their challenges and the strength it took to overcome them. One day, while organizing a community basketball game, Ethan overheard two of the center's staff members talking. "Can you believe that's the same guy who started here a few months ago?" one of them said. "He's like a completely different person now." "I know," the other replied. "The kids really respond to him. It's like he finally sees them for who they are." Ethan paused, letting their words sink in. He realized that he had indeed changed. The biases that had once clouded his judgment were slowly fading away, replaced by a genuine understanding and empathy for the people he now worked with. As he watched the kids laughing and playing on the basketball court, Ethan felt a profound sense of purpose. He wasn't just serving a sentence anymore. He was making a real difference in these young lives, and in doing so, he was changing his own life for the better. One evening, as Ethan was locking up the youth center, he heard a commotion outside. His heart raced as he recognized Andre's voice among the angry shouts. Ethan rushed out to find Andre, surrounded by a group of older teens, and the situation was dangerously close to becoming violent. "What's going on here?" Ethan called out, his voice firm but calm. Andre turned to him, eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "Ethan, they started it." Ethan approached slowly, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. He could feel the old instincts kicking in, the urge to assert authority and control. But something had changed in him. Instead of barking orders, he took a deep breath and spoke softly. "All right, everyone, let's take a step back and talk this through. No one needs to get hurt here." The older teens eyed Ethan warily, clearly recognizing him as an authority figure. But Ethan's calm demeanor seemed to catch them off guard. "This ain't your business, old man," one of them sneered. Ethan nodded, acknowledging the teen's words. "You're right. It's not my fight, but I care about Andre, and I don't want to see anyone get hurt. Can we talk about what's really going on here?" Ethan's words seemed to deflate some of the tension. He gently placed a hand on Andre's shoulder, guiding him a few steps back. Then he turned to the other teens, his expression open and attentive. "What's got you all worked up?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. As the teens began to explain, Ethan listened intently. He didn't interrupt or judge, he just nodded and asked clarifying questions. Slowly, the anger in their voices began to fade, replaced by frustration. Ethan realized there was a deep-seated hurt behind their actions. Andre watched in awe as Ethan navigated the conversation, diffusing the situation without a single threat or show of force. It was a side of Ethan he had never seen before, and it left a profound impact on him. As the group began to disperse, with tensions eased, Ethan turned to Andre. The young man's eyes were filled with a new respect and gratitude. "How did you do that?" Andre asked softly. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. "I listened, Andre. Sometimes that's all people really need." Back at home, Ethan's wife Emily noticed the changes in him. One evening, as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Ethan with a soft smile. "You seem different lately," she said gently. "It's like you're lighter somehow." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. "I feel different, Emily. This whole experience has opened my eyes in ways I never expected. Emily reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Tell me about it, she encouraged. Ethan's eyes welled up with tears as he began to speak. I've been so wrong, Emily. For so long, I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting people, but I was actually hurting them. I was so blinded by my own biases that I couldn't see the damage I was causing. Emily listened carefully as Ethan poured out his heart, describing his experiences at the youth center and the profound impact they had on him. He spoke of Andre and the other kids, their challenges, and their resilience. Ethan's transformation was not just about changing his behavior. It was about seeing the world differently and understanding the true meaning of empathy and support. Ethan stood with Emily, his heart heavy but hopeful. I want to be better, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For you, for our community, for myself. I want to keep learning and growing. Emily's eyes sparkled with tears of pride. She pulled him into a tight hug and whispered, I'm so proud of you, Ethan. This journey hasn't been easy, but seeing you change and become the man I always knew you could be, it's beautiful. As they embraced, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The road ahead was still long, but with Emily by his side and his newfound understanding, he felt ready to face whatever challenges came his way. Over the following months, Ethan's role at the youth center changed. What had begun as a court-mandated punishment turned into something he genuinely cared about. He found himself arriving early and staying late, eager to make a difference in the lives of the young people he now cared for deeply. One sunny afternoon, Ethan stood before a group of teenagers, his eyes glowing with enthusiasm. All right, team, he said, clapping his hands together. Who's ready to start our new community garden project? The kids cheered loudly, their excitement evident. Ethan had suggested the garden to the center's director as a way to teach responsibility, teamwork, and the value of nurturing something from seed to harvest. As they worked together, tilling the soil and planting seedlings, Ethan felt a warm sense of satisfaction. He watched Andre, who had once been resistant to Ethan's presence, patiently explaining to a younger boy how to space the tomato plants correctly. You're doing great, Andre, Ethan called out, giving him a thumbs up. Andre grinned back, a stark contrast to the scowl he had worn when they first met. Word of Ethan's dedication spread throughout the community. Parents began to approach him, thanking him for the positive impact he had on their children. Local businesses even offered to sponsor some of the center's programs, impressed by Ethan's initiatives. One evening, as Ethan was locking up the center, he noticed a familiar face approaching. It was Samuel Carter, the judge who had given him the chance to do community service. Samuel greeted him with a nod. I've been hearing good things about your work here, Ethan, Samuel said, a small smile on his lips. It seems you found your true calling. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. I have, he admitted, and I have you to thank for it. You could have given me a harsher sentence, but instead, you gave me a chance to learn and grow. I can't express how grateful I am. Samuel's smile widened. That's all I hoped for, Ethan, to see you understand and make amends. Keep up the good work. As Samuel walked away, Ethan felt a sense of pride and purpose he had never experienced before. He wasn't just serving his time, he was making a real difference. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace with himself and his place in the community. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the youth center, Samuel Carter pulled up in his car. He observed the bustling activity inside through the large windows, seeing children and teenagers engaged in various activities with Ethan at the center. Samuel took a deep breath and stepped out of his car. This was the first time he had seen Ethan since the trial, and he wasn't sure what to expect. Ethan was helping a young girl with her homework when he saw Samuel enter. His heart skipped a beat, filled with both gratitude and nervousness. Excusing himself, Ethan approached Samuel. Judge Turner, he said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "I didn't expect to see you here." Samuel nodded, his expression neutral but kind. "I wanted to see for myself how things were progressing, Officer Mitchell." The two men stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Ethan broke the silence first. "I want to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did for me, giving me this chance instead of a harsher sentence, has changed my life." Samuel's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear that, Ethan. That was my hope when I made my decision." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I never thought I'd say this, but your judgment was exactly what I needed." Ethan had been working at the youth center for a while, and he was feeling very happy and thankful. One day, Samuel, who was a judge, came to visit the center. Samuel told Ethan that he was really proud of the work he had done. Samuel said that he could see how much Ethan had changed and how hard he had worked to make things better. This made Ethan feel very proud of himself. He realized that working at the center was not just a punishment for him. It had become something he really cared about and wanted to keep doing. Ethan thought about the past and remembered the day he had arrested Samuel. He felt ashamed about how he had acted before. He had been arrogant and unfair, and it had made him feel bad inside. But now, as he looked around the center, he saw how much the kids were enjoying themselves and how they had grown. The center was full of laughter and energy, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He was grateful for the chance to make things right and to learn from the kids. "Sure, here's your story written as you provided." One of the kids, Andre, came up to Ethan and asked for help with a math problem. Ethan smiled and said, "Of course, let's work on it together." As Ethan helped Andre, he thought about what he had learned from working with the kids. He realized that true justice wasn't about having power or control. It was about understanding, empathy, and helping others. The kids at the center had taught him more about what it meant to be fair and kind than his time on the police force ever had. He understood now that his work at the center wasn't just something he had to do. It was something he wanted to continue. During the annual youth showcase at the center, Ethan felt a rush of pride as he watched the kids set up their projects. The room was decorated with colorful banners and everyone was excited. Andre came up to Ethan, smiling big, and said, "Can you believe how many people came today?" Ethan chuckled and replied, "It's amazing, Andre. You all deserve this recognition." As the event started, Ethan saw how much the kids had changed. Some kids who had been shy were now confidently presenting their projects, and others who had been angry were teaching younger kids new skills. It was clear that the center had made a big difference in their lives. The center's director then announced that they had a special recognition to give. She called Ethan to the front and said that he had been an important part of the center and had touched many lives with his hard work. Ethan felt his cheeks turn red as he walked up to the front and saw all the smiling faces in the crowd. Andre stepped forward holding a plaque and said, "We want to thank you, Officer Ethan. You came here because you had to, but you became like family to us. You believed in us and showed us that change is possible." Ethan accepted the plaque with trembling hands and looked at the words on it. It said that he was being recognized for outstanding service and dedication. He felt tears coming to his eyes as he tried to speak. Ethan said, "I came here thinking I was going to be the one teaching and helping, but you all have taught me so much more. You've shown me what real strength and community look like. I'm honored to be part of this family." The room burst into applause, and the kids gave Ethan a big group hug. As he stood there surrounded by the warmth of the community, he felt that he had truly changed. He was no longer the officer who saw things only one way. He was now a mentor, a friend, and someone who cared deeply about his community. One morning, Ethan stood outside the courthouse, feeling a mix of emotions. The building that once made him nervous now seemed welcoming. He took a deep breath and walked up the steps. Inside, he went to Judge Samuel Carter's office. As he waited, Ethan thought about how he had changed. A year ago, he had been arrogant and biased, but now he felt humble and grateful. When Samuel greeted him, he smiled and shook Ethan's hand. Ethan thanked Samuel for giving him a chance to learn and grow instead of being harsh with him. Samuel told Ethan that he was glad to hear how much he had changed, but that Ethan had done all the hard work himself. Ethan felt relieved and happy to hear this. He told Samuel that working with the kids had taught him more about empathy and understanding than he had ever learned before. Samuel explained that empathy was powerful because it helped people connect with others and see things from their perspective. Ethan agreed, feeling very thankful for the lesson. He said that it had changed how he saw the world and how he interacted with people. He felt that he was finally serving his community in the right way. As they shook hands again, Ethan felt a sense of closure. This handshake was more than just a greeting. It symbolized forgiveness, growth, and the power of empathy. Ethan felt that he had truly found his place and his purpose. If you enjoyed Ethan's story, there's another touching story you might like. Click here to watch it.